Hello and welcome, fellow lifelong learners. Thanks for joining me for One More Thing, a radio show all about cultivating our most valuable asset, our mind, and fostering a sense of curiosity to learn one more thing. We feature passionate practitioners and seasoned experts in numerous areas of interest for lifelong learners of all ages. One More Thing is sponsored by Kiffin & Company, a corporate learning and talent development consulting firm, and I'm your host, Kiffin McCoy Albert, a certified professional in talent development, learning advocate, and your fellow lifelong learner. Welcome to the show. In graduate school, I had multiple experiences with group assignments. In one semester, I had two very memorable but very different experiences. One was amazing. Our team divided out all the initial work, made a plan for reconvening to get everyone up to speed on their individual parts, and made sure that we all played a role in the final presentation while being fully versed on the role of the others in the group. I remember being nervous, but I was confident in our knowledge, ability, and plan, and it went great. The other assignment was totally different. We did all have an assigned role, but then there was no communication or collaboration, and one of the group members was afraid to turn loose of any real responsibility and made it harder on all of us to contribute. On presentation day, I was on edge with anxiety and lacked confidence in what we were doing. The presentation went okay, but it was definitely not what it could have been, and it was not an enjoyable experience. My guest today is going to give a name to these two types of experiences and talk a little bit more about that. So our conversation begins right after this.
Maximize impact with tailored solutions by partnering with Kiffin & Company. Developing your team is an investment, but it doesn't have to be just an expense. Discover more at kiffinandcompany.com and start your journey to effective learning today.
Joshua Wathen is the Chief Operations Officer of Triad InfoSec, the owner of Dukes Fortis Consulting, and a member of the Board of Advisors for Owners in Honor. He has chosen to help build these entities because they are veteran-owned and help others with service and security, both physically and digitally. This is more than just a job to him, it is his calling. Joshua is a U.S. Army veteran and holds qualifications as a Special Forces Weapons Sergeant, a Special Operations Combat Medic, and an airborne infantryman. During his military service, he learned that shiny medals are awarded for dark days done well, that people are more important than equipment, and most importantly, that your values are what make you who you are. Since leaving the military, Joshua has become a husband and a father, and he is a self-proclaimed serial entrepreneur, having built several businesses in different industries and helped grow multiple veteran service organizations, ranging from PTSD treatment to business development for transitioning veterans. He provides value to these organizations by being a team builder and a super connector. And he believes there's nothing more powerful than putting driven, capable, like-minded people in a room with a problem to solve. Wow, that's so impressive. I am happy to introduce you to Joshua Wathen as we talk about some of his area of expertise. Joshua, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Well, we are talking about eustress and distress. And for some people, they might say, I've never even heard of that word eustress. So maybe let's start with telling us a little bit about what that is and why this is your area of expertise.
So I think stress is a very important part of leadership to understand. I like to view stress as a superpower. A superpower can be used for good or it can be used for evil. There's a lot of determining factors on whether or not that's the direction of stress in your life. And I think that's what we're kind of going to explore today. Essentially, eustress is good stress and distress is bad stress.
With your military background, is that how you really got into delving into this area of knowledge?
Well, I think I experienced both sides of stress in the military until I got into school and started understanding a little bit more about psychology, and then started teaching leadership just based on the functionality of a good leader and the character of a good leader. I started trying to understand a good leader. And that's where I began to dive into the differences between eustress and distress. And there's a lot of good resources on growth mindset and eustress and distress. I know Brene Brown was a good resource for me. She taught at the University of Houston, where I graduated from for a long time. So I gravitated towards her stuff and then just kind of kept going down the rabbit hole and continue to learn more and more about it every single day. Right? It's ongoing.
Yeah, Brene is amazing. I mean, she's got so much research backed in so many areas. I always think of her as being around shame and vulnerability, which I'm sure there's a tie there, but I had not really thought about her in regards to stress. So that's going to be interesting, maybe to hear a little bit more about that too. I know that leadership is a big piece of your area, and you said about how stress being an essential piece, I think is the wording you use for leadership. And I would even say that's, I mean, that's an essential thing just in life, right? So with this being a show that's dedicated to lifelong learning, and I know people who may see the title of the show and go, oh, I want to learn about that because I don't know what it is. Where do you think we should start this conversation?
Well, let's start with what everybody knows, or maybe thinks they know, and that's
Okay.
that stress is bad. Reduce your stress, right? That it's a very common thing.
Yes.
I went to the doctor. The doctor said I need to take stress out of my life, or I'm going to end up back in the hospital or worse, right?
Yeah, I'm stressed out.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a balance to be had with stress, and there's a perspective to be understood with stress. And so, too much stress of any type is going to have long-term negative effects, because too much of anything is going to have negative long-term effects. But ultimately, if you want to begin understanding stress, you need to understand that when you get a little anxious or a little nervous and your heart starts pounding and you start sweating a little bit and your pupils dilate, maybe your breathing increases, that's your sympathetic nervous system kicking in, telling you, I'm getting you ready for a fight. If you can approach that from a positive mindset, then you understand that your body's getting you ready for battle. And you can use that to your advantage instead of feeling like you're doing something wrong. That's how it begins. From there, we can talk about support is a huge piece from a leadership perspective. Whereas typically, or maybe traditionally is a better term, the manager looks over your shoulder and tells you when you're doing things well. Very seldom do they tell you when you're doing things right. And this is a lot of Brene Brown's vulnerability that comes in is, can people be open and honest with you in an organization? Can they reach out to you for help? Are you providing encouragement when they're going up the hill, pushing that boulder that you told them to push? Are you providing them the resources? The goal here is not to reduce all the stress of your employees. You'll never get anything done. The goal is to find their critical point of how much stress they can manage and what support they need so that that stress is beneficial. Staying home from work, taking a nap and maybe playing games or binge watching something on Netflix will leave you feeling worse than completing that to-do list at work, as long as it's done in the right environment. And that's a good example of distress, or a distress reaction versus a eustress reaction.
Yeah, and I would second that even at home, right? Like we were talking before we started recording about that this is Thanksgiving week, and I happen to be the host house this year for my family, and it's grown to a much larger crowd than originally expected. And same kind of thing though, is like I was finding myself stressed out a little bit about making sure we had room for everybody. And I'm the type that I like a pretty table, so I have it set, with all the things. I prefer to use real dishes versus disposable and all that. So I was getting myself worked up. And so then I wasn't getting any of the things done that I needed to do. And exactly what you said, I was like, I'm going to go take a nap. I'm going to lay in bed and watch a Christmas movie. I don't know, something, right? And then the thought of, okay, after that 2 hours, I'm going to get up and all of that's still going to be there for me to do. And I'm going to be stressed out right in the same place again. So then I stepped back and it kind of gave me, and I think maybe this is where you're going to go with it, is it gave me some motivation to kickstart me into like getting that stuff just knocked out one bite at a time, as they say, but getting that stuff knocked out and realizing that maybe some things have to change. Like this year, we are going to use disposable plates instead of real plates, things like that. Is that kind of where you were headed, is to not just bury your head in the sand kind of thing, but use that to your advantage?
That's a huge piece, is that if you have stress and you have a distress reaction, or you're viewing the stress as distress, then you have two options internally, is to do something about it or go into a hole and let it fester, right? And ultimately, that can lead to really bad things, not just in your work or professional life or personal life. It can lead to things like depression, isolation, right? To me, it starts with procrastination.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of that is understandable, but discipline is the measurement of a successful person as far as I can tell. Persistence and discipline. I think that the support network is also a huge piece to that. Who can you call for help? Or for me personally, who's depending on me to get this done? I get motivated quite a bit easier when somebody else is relying on me than when I just want to be the best at whatever it is. I don't really care. But if somebody's expecting me to show up and they need my help, I'm all over it. So there's a lot of self-awareness on how to motivate yourself and improve your discipline. But then there's just plain and simple old-fashioned grit and fortitude. That's where character comes in, right? If your value is keeping your word and meaning what you say, then when you put things into place, you leave yourself no option except to follow through, for better or for worse. And that makes you a better decision maker in the long run. Realize what to say no to sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Learning to say no. Gosh, that's such a huge thing. Well, so let me back up a second and see. I think you kind of started on it and then we went in a different direction. But are there signs or ways to realize stress? Okay. And let's say, I think it's pretty easy for people, like once they get to almost like a breaking point, right? Like that, okay, yeah. When you say the things like I'm stressed out or, I need a vacation from my life or whatever it might be, before it gets to that level, whether it's eustress or distress, are there ways to identify that that's happening? And are there signs of eustress versus distress that people could look for?
Yeah, I typically just look at productivity. How I feel or how somebody else feels. It can be very opinion dependent, and it can be kind of nebulous to see from the outside in, or even worse, sometimes from the inside out. We lie to ourselves a lot about how we feel to make ourselves try and feel better. But if you take the actions that are normal for you, or maybe the direction that you want to go, versus how you're acting now, it gives you a really good measuring stick to see whether or not you might be stressed out. There's also health signs. That's a little bit longer down the road, right? If you're having tightness in your chest or palpitations or you're sweating or you can't sleep, like there's probably something that's been going on for a little bit longer than just a day or two. Not always the case. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a health professional, but if you're having tightness in the chest or chest pains, seek a health professional,
Right.
please. Don't just sit there and think about it. There might be something more serious.
Okay. It's not just stress.
Yeah. And so I do a lot of counseling for veterans that are dealing with PTSD, right? And I tell them all the time, listen to the people around you that you trust, because they're going to notice that you're off before you'll admit it to yourself. If it's something big or it's been growing for a little while, if somebody says, hey, try this, try that. And Mighty Oaks, I'm learning to, in their leadership program, they do the week-long retreats for veterans to help with PTSD and prevent suicide. Okay. One of their big questions that they ask to help guys make a decision to make a change is, if what you're doing isn't working, why not try something different? And it's really simple, but really, really powerful. That if you feel like you don't have much energy, your brain is scattered, you feel out of control, whatever it is you're doing that's making you feel that way, obviously it's not working. Why not try something different?
What do you think are some ways to think or realize that it is eustress that you're feeling versus distress? Because when you talk about those, of course, longer term with the health thing, health reactions from your body that you can realize, or even things like when you realize the foggy brain or the distractedness or the procrastination, which can, obviously be multiple root causes, one of them being the distress. But how does that differ with eustress, identifying or realizing that that's what's happening?
Well, simply put, it's, do you feel good or bad? Right? Think of it like you were talking about, where you had all of these things to do and you just kind of, you hit this I want to shut down mode, right? Compare that feeling to the feeling of flow state, when you've got a million things to do, but you're nice and organized on a list and you're just chopping things down one by one. And all of a sudden you're just in this flow state where my brain's working, everything's clicking. Like for me, when I'm in a flow state, even if I have distractions, when my kids comes in and needs something, like slow is smooth, smooth is fast is the way I feel. Like everything's just going down. I'm not falling over myself. I'm not thinking about 100 different things. It's one thing at a time, because I have all of these small victories built up. And I would say that is a huge piece to changing the direction. If you're in a distressful space, find small victories. There's a really famous graduation speech by a Navy SEAL commander at, I think, the University of Texas. It's for like 10 years old. It's on YouTube. But the speech is called Start by Making Your Bed. And the whole premise of that speech is that you start your day off with very small victories, because then you make your bed, you brush your teeth, get ready for the day. You already have three wins. Eustress to me is all about stacking wins, sharing those wins, and then asking for help when you don't know how to win.
I almost, maybe this is oversimplified, but I almost think of it like, we're heading into the Christmas season. And so the parents are feeling a lot of distress potentially, and the kids are feeling a lot of eustress, like that excitement. And maybe it's not the same, but that's the kind of the way I feel about or think about it, is that excitement, or like for those of us adults that when we're going to go on vacation, there's that stress of excitement and going somewhere new, but it's not the bad stress of, I can't pay my bills, or like with the veterans that you work with and dealing with the PTSD and things that they've experienced. Do you feel like I'm on the right track with that, or am I oversimplifying it?
I think that the emotions for eustress and distress are similar to what you're talking about, but I don't think that a kid getting excited for Christmas is a eustress. I think that's just pure joy, which is why it's so amazing to be around. I think that if you take the parents that have some distress around Christmas because all of the things to do, I would say go back to the basics. Preparation is the key to success. Preparation and planning and communication is the key to unlocking a eustress situation. I know that for me personally, when it comes to being a husband and a father, what causes me distress is when my wife and I are not on the same page. The sky can literally be falling, but if we are communicating and we're on the same page, it's not stressful at all. We're just jamming out, getting things done. But as soon as we're going opposite directions, we're butting heads, now it's distressful because my support network isn't there.
That's a really good comment. So with coping, I feel like I'm kind of a boil it down kind of person. So I feel like the three things that you've really talked about with coping with it, or maybe trying to prevent distress, is organization, having your plan and being organized, communication, and having a support system. That seems like three really good foundational pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And Proverbs said it best, iron sharpens iron. Okay, I don't know if you've ever done any metal work or not, but if you want to make a sword, you got to stick a rough piece of iron into a blazing hot fire. You got to take it out and hammer on it a bunch. And you got to do that over and over and over again until it's purpose driven. And so a big part of this is mindset, that if you want to get somewhere in life, you have to be willing to embrace the challenges that come along with that. And if you can get from not only willing, but excited about it, there's a mountain to climb. This is going to be an amazing adventure. I've got a team with me. Now we're really approaching what eustress looks like. And I think that goes back to the mindset from my military days in special operations. Was the number one selection criteria across any special operation organization in the United States is trust. Can you trust the people next to you? We want folks of high aptitude, but if it's a high aptitude, low trust person, they won't get selected because they're going to end up being the toxic person, right? And they'll tear everybody else down. Simon Sinek mentions this a couple of times in some of his talks and in one or two of his books as well. I know Leaders at Last, he definitely mentions it. That's a big piece to why those units can be so effective in such unwinnable or conventionally unwinnable situations, is because they all trust each other, and it doesn't matter what the problem is, we're going to figure it out together. And that's a huge piece, right? It's not on you or me, it's on us. From the perspective of a Green Beret, Rambo is the most famous Green Beret out there, right? Everybody's seen the Rambo movies. I can tell you that other than the action-packed awesomeness that is the Rambo movies, guys that are actually Green Berets don't like that guy. They don't like him because it portrays it as a one-man show, and we're a team of 12. And that's the key to consistency, is who's holding you accountable and doing it in a constructive way and not waiting till the last minute, right? That's what'll keep you moving and keep you from procrastinating, is when somebody goes, hey, where are we at on this? And you're like, oh, man, I'm behind. Do you need help? No, give me a couple hours. Okay. It's real simple. But it's that consistent accountability all the way around.
Yeah.
Which
also leads to not doing everything yourself. I just experienced this a few days ago. And so, that's an interesting thing to think about, that, okay, that team of 12, they all need to be doing some part of it, not one person doing it all. And the other 11 are just standing around like, okay, well, I could have helped, but just stand over here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from a team perspective, Doesn't matter whether it's a family unit, a business unit, or a military unit. Cross training is key. There's a certain amount of redundancy that's absolutely necessary to provide continuity. And that allows, if there's a team of 12 and one person is fumbling the ball, it allows 2 or 3 other cross-trained people on that team to pick that ball up and carry it for them while they're down on the ground. And that, just that alone, hey, I got this, I already did it for you. It'll motivate people in a couple of ways. One, they'll be grateful. And or if you're like me, you might be a little pissed off and competitive because I wanted to do that. Well, keep up, right? That's the eustress. Okay, keep up. That's stressful. I got to get up. I got to keep up. I got to push harder. I got to learn. But I'm doing it as a team. I'm motivated intrinsically based on what motivates me. Now we're on the right path.
For our veterans, the battle doesn't end on the battlefield. PTSD can create barriers that alienate them from the ones they love. But with your support, we can bridge the gap and restore the bonds torn apart by war. Your donation can help us provide vital family support programs that bring healing and reconciliation. Donate today to strengthen families affected by PTSD. Together, we can make a difference.
Learn more about the PTSD Foundation of America at www.ptsdusa.org.
As always, when I am having guests and doing these shows, the time just goes by so fast. It's just insane. I do have one question that I always end every show, but before I do that, I want to ask you, is there anything else around this topic that we didn't specifically talk about that you would like to share with our lifelong learner audience?
Make a decision. That's the number one reason why I see people having a lot of distress and get this paralysis and kind of soaking in it and going down a hole is because they're not making a decision. But that is one thing that we definitely was just grinded into us in the military is indecision is the worst decision you can make. Just make a decision. Go forth and figure some stuff out. And as you're moving, as your feet are moving, your mind will slow down and allow you to figure out which direction to turn. But don't stand still and soak in despair. You're never going to get out of there doing that.
That's interesting because then you think about indecision is really just a form of procrastination, right? In and of itself. And there's been so many things that I've read about that talk about your body moving, like movement being so important for sky's the limit on the things that it's important to. And so now you're even bringing it up here that in a little bit different gist, but you're moving your feet and your brain will slow down. Gosh, I love that idea. Get it moving.
It helped me. I was in a hole. I had to deal with my PTSD for, 3 years or so, and I sat still. So I'm speaking from a place of experience that as soon as some other veterans kind of got me up and just got me going fishing and hanging out, all of a sudden I was like, wait a second, what have I been doing? But I was trapped in my own thought process. And so as soon as I started moving, I didn't have time to sit there and dwell on anything. I had stuff to do.
Yeah.
And then you really start to kind of level up. And I got back to where I was before I had to go through that. But man, and if you see somebody sitting still, you don't have to sit there and tell them that everything's wrong or that everything's going to be fine. They know that that's not necessarily the case. My suggestion would be grab their hand and say, hey, come with me. I got something fun to do. Or I need some help, depending on what motivates them. Just get them moving. And do the same thing with your teams at work. If somebody's sitting there paralyzed, get them up out of their chair. Walk and talk. Let them get it off their mind. And then you have some intelligence on how to help.
Really, bottom line is get moving, have that organization preparedness, get your body moving, and use your support system. Man, it sounds so simple.
Yeah, I think removing a lot of distractions and then grit, consistency, persistence, discipline. Pick your word. That's the hard part about this. The concepts are pretty easy to understand. The hard part is doing it day in and day out, and that's where the support system for accountability comes in.
And I think that in this arena would apply the same that I've heard with everything from changing diet to exercise routines to whatever it is you're trying to change, is that if you have a day and you don't do what you should, you don't move or whatever, not to beat yourself up, give yourself grace and realize, okay, like I failed on this moment and now I'm going to succeed in this new moment. That's an important lesson too.
Absolutely. I mean, I liked economics in school. I like math and kind of making conceptual things. But the best thing I ever learned from economics and business courses was the term sunk cost. If you paid for something and you got no value out of it, then it doesn't do you any good to try and recover that. And the same is true if you spent an entire day or a week or a month or however long not going the direction you want. If you consider it a sunk cost, that it's time already spent and money already spent, then there's no reason for you to waste any more time on it today.
I love that too. Something else that you said a minute ago that really resonated, or at least it made me think of it, if you didn't say the words exactly, but ultimately with anything that you're going to do, that even if it is a quote high stress activity, for some obviously military service is good, going into combat, or even field training exercises maybe evoke that too. But then from a speaking standpoint, I know that when I have a speaking engagement, I am much less stressed. It's still a little bit of a stressful, but hopefully a little more eustress than distress. But I'm a lot less stressed out if I am prepared. And so I think that goes back to that organization and support and communication, maybe that all of that is wrapped up, but that preparedness. And when you're talking about military service, my gosh, that's got to be huge, right? You've prepared for this over and over and over before it actually happens. You're not going in blind.
Yeah, I think preparedness is definitely a big factor on not just performance. Being prepared will absolutely reduce the amount of distress that you have or anxiousness that you have around the situation. But I think more importantly is to realize that unless you signed up for speaking engagements, you'll never have an opportunity to put that eustress on your system so that you can learn and grow in order to be prepared. And that's really the key when it comes to leading teams and organizations, is you've got to set an audacious goal that is achievable, and then you got to go out and figure it out. Because if you don't do anything like that and you stay in that safe space, you never have a challenge that produces stress. And you have to have that neutral stress there, and then you get to determine whether or not that's going to be a good growth experience or a detrimental, disparaging experience.
Which will then also set the path for future experiences. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. So good. Well, as we wrap up, I always end with asking my guest, what is something that you are learning about these days? What's something that has your interest currently?
Oh man, the book of Proverbs. Whether you're religious or not, or a Christian or not, doesn't matter. I can promise you that the book of Proverbs has 31 chapters in it. There's 31 days of the month. I read one every single day, and then at the beginning of the month, I rotate and just start all over. And there is more wisdom packed into those 31 chapters than anything else that I've ever read. And I'm loving it. Absolutely loving it.
Awesome. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. I do tend to like a lot of, I find myself referencing a lot of Proverbs, but I haven't gone back and just read Proverbs like what you're saying, just taking one chapter at a time. That might be something I need to go back and do myself.
It's really neat. So I'm in 2 leadership programs right now, one at my church, and one with Mighty Oaks. And my coach.
And what is Mighty Oaks?
Mighty Oaks is a veteran nonprofit that provides week-long retreats and resiliency programs for veterans and active duty. So my coach at the church for the leadership program told me at the very beginning that Proverbs will teach you how to interact with the world, talk to the world, and reading Psalms will teach you how to talk to God. And she was dead on. It's been an eye-opener.
Well, I really, really appreciate you taking time to share some of your area of expertise. It's something that I think people should definitely look more into and realize the benefits of eustress and the detriment of distress and how they can leverage that in their life.
Thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it always is to have a conversation with you.
During my conversation with Joshua about eustress and distress, we touched on several aspects of both and how to handle each of them related to daily life and work. One thing that I want to tie back today, though, is the concept of getting to the point where you elicit excitement for a challenge that ignites eustress versus that challenge causing distress. Employee studies show that growth opportunities within employer organizations are desired and valued. Getting to that mindset shift could lead to incredible growth for individual contributors as well as leaders. It has definitely struck a chord within me. Thank you again to my guest, Joshua Wathen, and thank you to today's sponsor, the PTSD Foundation of America. And as always, thank you for tuning in week after week. You've been listening to One More Thing, a radio show on the Power Me Up radio station on iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Kippen McCoy Albert. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to you tuning in next time as we continue cultivating your mind with one more thing.